Hey guys, I'm David from Lineboy Studio, and today we're going to look at a couple tricks you can use to improve your shadows and your Toon Shaded characters in Blender. First, I'm going to show you how you can easily paint out light using masks to sort of cheat your shadows that are casted by your lights, and then we're going to look at how you can add more definition to your models using both real-time and baked ambient occlusion. So, hope you guys are ready, and without further delay, let's get started. Alright, so I've opened up my scene, and as you can see, I've traded my usual sphere for this dinosaur model from our project Dinomancers. And it's just going to be a lot easier for me to show you some of the shadow tricks with a more detailed model. So, first thing I want to show you is how you can sort of paint permanent shadows on your character. So, let's say you wanted to add a shadow around the eye here, just underneath the eyebrow, to give it more of a menacing look. And maybe you don't want it to be in the texture. Maybe you want it to blend seamlessly with the shadow casted from your light. And this is actually something that's quite easy to do. So let me just show you how we can do that. I'm going to open up, extend this thing here, press Shift F3 to access the shader editor, select my character, and then I'm gonna press Tab to inspect this node tree. And if you've been following the last few tutorials, you'll be pretty familiar with this setup. This is the Toon Shader that we've been building together, and there's been a couple of new additions that you might want me to explain. So as you can see, there's a bunch of colors here on the right, and these are the five colors that we're using to make this character. So you can sort of dynamically play with the colors here inside Blender. I could have just placed my texture of my character in base color, but the way we like to work on this project is to be able to dynamically change things up all inside Blender. So the way it works is I have a couple of mix nodes here, and as you can see, the first one is just mixing base color with painted color 2, and the factor is this mask 2 here, and all the other mix nodes are the same. It's just mixing painted color 3 with painted color with the result of this one, and it's just being mixed with a series of black and white masks. And if I jump back by pressing Tab, you can see that these masks here are textures look like this. If I press Shift F10 to access the image editor, and they're very easy to paint inside Blender, as you will see. And this has some relevance to what we're going to be doing, because the way we're going to be painting this shadow mask is using a black and white mask. And I really like this way of working because it's very intuitive and it's very easy to paint black and white masks and with the tools, with the texture painting tools in Blender. So let me show you how it works. First, I'll need to go in my key light here, and if I bring my group output, you'll see that this color ramp here is just the black and white information from our light, right? If you remember the first tutorial, we're just crunching this this light information. And what we can do is, before it's being fed to all these other nodes here, we can just make some changes to it. We can add another node here that we paint ourselves. And this is exactly what we're going to be doing. So I'm going to change the light here like this. And I'm going to add a new mix RGB node. And we're going to be mixing this with a black color. And the factor is going to be a new image texture. So we need an input, a little input here. So I'm going to drag the circle to factor and reconnect my group output like it was before. So if I zoom back and create a new image texture, oops, sorry. So Shift A, type in image texture. I'm gonna plug it into this here. Actually, I should probably rename it. So just wait. Okay, so Tab, go in nodes here and locate my new input, call it shadow mask. I'm gonna bring it all the way to the top. Right under shadow color, yeah, to keep things together. So Now I can create a new texture, call it Triceratops Shadow Mask. And I'll change the values by pressing Alt. I can select both at the same time. Type in 4096, unconnect alpha, and there you go. Now I have a black texture that can, like a fresh new texture that still doesn't look like anything, but I'm going to start painting on it in just a second. So if I go in texture paint, I can press N, go in tool panel, Triceratops body, Triceratops shadow mask. This is our new texture, and you can see it's all black on this little thumbnail here. And if I select the white color, I can start painting some permanent shadows. So I'm painting with symmetry on, so it's painting on both sides. And since my second color is black, I can use Control to erase stuff as I paint. So it's pretty easy to work that way. And as you can see, if I switch back to object mode, it's blending seamlessly with the light, with the shadows from the light. So it's pretty nice. You can obviously add a lot of details like this. I can actually show you what I've done a few days ago. So shadow mask here. So it's a bunch of small details here and there. If you look at the legs here, there's a bit of shadow here. I think this area here was painted just around the, just here, just little details here and there, give it some character. So you can really have fun with this technique. And now, the second trick I wanted to show you is how to add ambient occlusion to your model. So things don't look so bad when you look at it from this angle, but let's say you were looking at this angle, light coming from the front. You see this section is really missing some definition. It's really just this flat color, and you can really benefit from having a bit of shadows here, but you're never going to be getting those. Even you can crunch using color ramps your light information all you want. No light is getting here, so it's never going to be getting any kind of shadow information here. And this is where ambient occlusion comes into play. So let me go and actually just add ambient occlusion right away using these settings here in render properties. So let me show you. If I bring up distance and pump this to 10, bam, you have some ambient occlusion. This is a really cheap way to do it. The problem is you really don't have that many settings to play with. Let's say I wanted this large of ambient occlusion, but just at 50% opacity. There's no way to do it. I can bump the factor to 4, but it's not going to make it transparent. It's just going to reduce how far it's going. So the way I prefer to do it is to use the ambient occlusion node inside the shader. That way you can really play with the different values, have much more control, change the color of it, and then you can mix it with a baked occlusion from Cycles, which I'm going to show you how to do. So it's pretty nice all around. I'm going to turn down this occlusion to maybe 0.5, so it's barely there. And okay, so let me go back to my shader. There we go. Tab, and I'm going to create a new frame to put this ambient occlusion in. So frame, but not wireframe. Need frame, and I'm going to rename it. Just press N to go in label, ambient occlusion, and change the label size to 50. And then we're going to add the ambient occlusion node I was talking to you about. So ambient occlusion, put it in there, and we're going to create a color ramp. Gonna plug it in there, and let's see how it looks. So right now it doesn't look like much because I've bumped down the factor to 0.5, so you don't see much. I'm going to add a matte node underneath in between the two and change this to power, which is what I like to use when I need to bump things up quickly. So there you go, and now you can crunch this value how much you want. And what I like is often to use two color ramps and mix them together so you can control the softness in your material. So let me do that just now. I'm going to duplicate this one. So this one's going to be sharp. This one's going to be soft. Oops. And then I'm going to create using Shift A, mix RGB. I'm going to mix these two together. And using this factor, I can now, oops, it's plugged the alpha in there, so I need to make sure it's color. Okay, so now I can sort of play with the softness. Oh, wait, I need my power in there as well. Okay, so now you have sharpness, softness. Pretty cool. All right, so now let's say we want to add a new node so we can control the color of this thing. So I'm going to duplicate this mix node, Alt-P to unparent it. And this is going to be a mask that says where, so it's a black and white mask, and we want the white to be where the previous shader will go, and the black will be the new color. So this is going to be going into color 2. This is going to be in the factor. So this color is going to be the color of our occlusion. So you can make it red or whatever. I like to use red color when it's a material for skin. It sort of looks like ambient subsurface scattering, sorry. So there you go. And okay. Now, when you play with this color, it's not the best way to, it's not really changing the opacity. Like I could choose a lighter blue, but the problem is this lighter blue is going completely over my texture. So I need another node to control opacity of this color. So I'm going to duplicate this mix node, and I want this to be white. Okay. So by using this factor here, so color 1 will be white, this one will be color 2, and this will be our new parameter that we'll add later on. That's going to be called opacity. So when it's 0, it just doesn't look like anything. Basically, it's like we're taking this this black and white information of our ambient occlusion, and then we're putting it into a mix node, and we're saying, hey, mix this with white. And when it's at 100%, we're seeing the color 2, this one, but when it's at 1, we're just seeing the white. So so pretty neat. Now, there are some issues with this way of doing ambient occlusion. Because it's calculated in real time using screen space information, there's some weird things that can happen. Let me show you. So you see how there's shadow here underneath, but when I zoom, sorry. Actually, I'm just going to bump this distance factor to 12. Okay, yeah. So you see how I have shadows here underneath, but when I zoom, I lose this information. So that's something I don't like about this real-time ambient occlusion, is that I would like ambient occlusion to be underneath the belly here, but to always be there, even if I do a close-up of the belly. So that's why I'm going to be using this ambient occlusion just for things that are closer together, so maybe this area here, and I'm going to be using the baked occlusion for larger things like underneath the tail, underneath the belly, and the head and stuff. So I'm going to be using a distance that makes sense for smaller things, like this, and now we need to generate our new baked occlusion in cycles. So we're going to do that right now. Yeah, just before that, I'm just gonna start adding some parameters right away, so we don't have a ton to do later on. So let me duplicate this group input here, and I'm going to let me maximize this here for you. So I'm gonna be dragging this circle here, bottom of the group input, and I'm gonna be putting it into my color here of my occlusion. If I press N, go to nodes. This is going to be sort of my new section called Occlusion. Then I'm going to create a new setting for using this power node. It's going to be called Coverage. Then I'm going to create one with this mix node, the second one, which is going to be called Opacity. And I'm going to do a last one with the first mix node, which is going to be softness. All right, so let's just test, make sure all of these work. So as you can see, you have occlusion, color, coverage, sort of the how far it goes. And then opacity, you can just turn it on or off. And then softness. This is so that way you can get very sharp details. And this is actually how I like to use this one, just to get these nice little details just in small spaces. All right. Baked occlusion. I'm going to duplicate this thing here. So Shift-D, and then I'm going to press X. Okay, and the reason I'm moving it away is because if you leave it over this one, even if you hide it, it's going to be sort of using it as calculation, and your ambient occlusion is just going to render dark. Actually, something that happened to me a couple of days ago, and I couldn't figure out why. So I'm just saying, if when you click bake on the ambient occlusion, it's all dark, it's probably because there's something hidden underneath that's causing some problems. So I'm going to be creating new material for this. I don't need this Toon Shader. I just need a sort of a principled shader, basic one. I'm going to delete all these shaders here. Okay, I'm going to turn off all my lights and oops. In my previous Triceratops. And I'm going to delete my solidify modifier. I'm probably going to apply my subdiv and delete the armature. Okay, and now I'm going to switch to cycles. The only thing you need to do really is to create a new image for the bake texture to go to. So I'm going to press Shift-A, image texture, and I'm just going to be doing a small one to show you very quickly. You call it, I don't know, occlusion bake, okay? And then if you go to your settings here, you have render properties, bake, you can choose ambient occlusion, make sure you unselect selected to active. This is used for things like normal maps. And the two settings you need to play with are the resolution of your image and the number of samples. So right now it's 32. If I bake, so to bake, you just make sure you select your image and click on bake. So it's going to look pretty crappy right now because my resolution of my texture is low, the number of samples is low. So if I plug this here right now, you can see it's very low resolution. But I did another bake yesterday, in which I cranked the settings quite a bit. I think I put this one at 2048 and this one at 4K. So let me show you how it looks. Baked occlusion. There you go. Now it's pretty smooth. There's not really any artifacts. And this took probably more than an hour to render. But now that it's done, I can just use it in my shader and I'll have to calculate anything anymore. So cool. I'm just going to hide this, get my previous Triceratops back, and switch back to Eevee. All right. So, to go into my Toon Shader, and Now we need a whole new, like all these nodes here, we're going to have to repeat them for our baked occlusion. So I'm going to Shift D, duplicate all these things here. Actually, not this one. This one I'm going to delete. And I'm going to create a new input. And this one I'm going to be placing in the first input of my power node. This new power node I duplicated. And this one I'm going to be renaming it baked occlusion. So now if I press tab to jump back, create a new image texture, and pick my baked occlusion, I can put it in there, baked occlusion. There you go. Press tab to come back here, and okay. So here again, I'll need some settings. So this will be coverage. Let me zoom here. Okay, so this will be baked coverage. This will be baked opacity. This will be baked softness. And I'm going to be mixing these two together using a very simple multiply operation. So these two are going to be multiplied together. Make sure that your factor for your multiply is set to 1. And this is now going to be being the factor for this node here at the top. So let me show you how it looks like. Okay, so obviously it's much too strong right now. Go to materials. So I can turn down the opacity quite a bit. I can change the coverage. And the cool thing is it reacts really well to making this one sharp, okay? And as you can see, the cool thing about this one is if I zoom in, it's always going to be there. It's pretty cool. So I would use very different settings depending on the lighting and how far away I am from my model and stuff. For example, if I was looking at my character from this side and there's just a bit of light hitting from the right, then probably I'll use a much sharper setting on this thing. Because this area is pretty big and I need like a second section separating the light. But if I'm looking at it from this angle, maybe I'd make it quite softer because I already have this light here, so I might make it perfectly soft and just give this light, this shadow area, a bit of a gradient, but let it do the job. So there's one last thing I like to add on this thing. It's not totally necessary, maybe you won't need it in your project, but I like to have the option to limit the ambient occlusion to the shadow area only. That way the gradient can never go outside of it. So let me show you how to do that. So I'm going to be creating a new mix node here. And I'm going to be, okay, so the color 2 will be white. And I'm going to be using as my factor, remember this black and white node that we created earlier? So this is going to be our mask. So this is going to be our mask and saying where we want total white to appear. So maybe I can show you. So this is occlusion, and then we're saying, hey, instead, let's make everything white here where we have our previous light mask. And we need an option to turn this on and off. So I'm going to be creating a last mix node. I know that's a lot of mix nodes. And this one would be black, and that way you can play with the setting. So before it's being used as a mask, we're sort of multiplying it by a black or not. So this is the setting that we're going to be using to say, should we limit the occlusion to the shadow area? So I'm going to be creating a last parameter in this factor here, going to be called limit to light. So now I can decide, oh, maybe I'd probably prefer to have this second slot here. That way, when I set limit to light at 1, it's being limited. So depending on the style you're going for, maybe you want this, maybe you don't. So if you don't use it, you're gonna get larger gradients over your whole character, which might be something you want. But if you're going for a more traditional cel shaded look, you might want to have this section to be totally clean, not have any big gradients in there, and just have a bit of a gradient inside your shadow area here, just a bit of it. So yeah, feel free to play around with these settings. There's one last thing. So this pretty much covers what I want to show you with this ambient occlusion and the painting the shadows tricks. But there's one last thing I wanted to point out. So far in the tutorials, I've always been using sunlights, okay? And you can actually use any of these lights here. And there might be some advantages to using something other than sunlights, depending on what you're working on. So the thing is, sunlights, you cannot change the size of it, so you cannot have very soft shadows. If I choose point light or spotlight, I just need to make this much stronger. You have this option here that's called radius. And if you put it to 0, you get the result of using a sunlight. It's going to be very sharp looking. But as you increase this value, you can have increasingly softer shadows. And as you can see, it's not perfect, but you just have to increase your sampling here, and you get better results. So by default, this is going to be maybe 16 in your viewport and 32 in your render. But as you increase this to 32 and 64, you can get pretty smooth results. So there might be times where you want your shadows to be soft. And the cool thing is it doesn't play with how we crunch the light values on our color ramp. It's just like the cast shadows that being affected by this. So yeah, again, feel free to play with these settings, but I just wanted to point it out in case it's useful to you. So pretty much covers material I wanted to cover in this tutorial. Hope you've enjoyed it. Oh, and some of you have been asking if we have a Patreon or if there's any way they can help us financially. The answer so far is no. We don't have any Patreon, and it's something we're looking into. Maybe something we'll do later this year. But honestly, what we want to do is really just to grow this channel. So we're excited about you being excited by stuff, and we love it when you share your models with us. So if you want to help us, please subscribe to this channel, share with your friends, and show us what you do with this shader on Twitter. We love it. So yeah, keep being great, and thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.